Hello everybody. How you doing today? I'm doing alright myself. Not feeling that great. I've had a cold for the last few days, so if I sniffle and sound funny, that's why. Anyway, I have a little story for you guys, so got all cozy. I'm in my old room, although it's my brother's room now. He's not here right now, so I can use it. Got my cup of hot cocoa with whipped cream, and I'm going to tell you a little story about myself. See, I mentioned that my dad is coming to visit on New Year's Day for a few days from Salt Lake, and how excited I am about that. So I thought I would give you guys a little bit of background on what the situation is with my dad. The reason I really plan on actually telling the story is I think it has some merit. I think it's a very important story in my life, and telling it, you get a real glimpse into who I am, what I've gone through, some of what I've gone through in my life, and how that's made me who I am today, and why I'm grateful for it. So I'm hoping it'll be of use to somebody out there who might be going through a similar situation or has gone through something like that. So here goes. I am the only child between my dad and my mom. I'm the only child between my dad and my mom. When my mom was growing up, she went through some really difficult times. She got married at 17, which, when that happens, depending upon the situation, doesn't always bode well for the marriage. My sister got married at 17, but the situation was a lot different. My mom married a guy from a band, and he ended up basically going off with one of the girls that traveled with the band. Anyway, so she got married when she was 17, which is where my older sister came from. And right away, that kind of set off a lot of difficulties in her life, being an 18-year-old single mother, with having gone through a lot of things in her past with her family. My grandma was an alcoholic when my mom was younger. So, right away she kind of started life off on her own, on a pretty tough foot. And a lot of complicated issues involved with her relationship with my dad, but that didn't last. And when she was pregnant with me is when she met Carl, who was my dad, was the only father figure in my life for a very long time. Carl was actually the person that brought my mom to church for the first time, and as much as there were problems with him later, he has a lot of problems. He was definitely a godsend in our lives at that point in time. He helped my mom out of a lot of hard situations. That's why it's so hard to see the things he's going through now and how messed up his life is. But like I said, that's that's another story. I was 7 years old when I found out that Carl wasn't my dad. I knew that Sarah had a different dad, but I had assumed that the youngest five, their father was my father my whole life. That's what I'd been raised to understand. And my mom sat me down when I was 7 years old and explained it to me. I think it was like early in the year. And I got to talk to him on the phone. And that year we took a special trip out to Wyoming so that I could meet him. That's where he lived at the time. And we hit it off right away. And I spent one summer there with them. And unfortunately, after that first year, it was pretty much followed with what can become a typical situation in having a distant father relationship. A lot of lapses between calls, broken promises. Multiple times packages that he had sent were lost in the mail a little more often than would make for a plausible coincidence. So that was tough enough. And then when I was 14 years old, my dad called. He called on my birthday, which to me was a big deal. That didn't really happen. And also, for pretty close to the first time, he had a lot of things to say about how better things were going to be, and how he was going to call more, he was going to be a part of my life. He'd been talking to my mom about it. He was sorry, all this stuff. He didn't usually talk about that stuff, but he did on my 14th birthday. So I hung up the phone with more raised expectations than I'd probably ever had. And that was the last time I talked to my dad for 4 years. He stopped calling. This was right after my grandpa passed away, and he went through trouble with his girlfriend, common-law wife, when she ran off with his kids, and he didn't get back in touch with them for a while. 4 years and nothing. The first 2 of that were probably the worst years of my life. First 3, I became very angry. I don't think I realized I was angry at my dad at the time. Up until I was about 16, I was a nightmare. I would be fine for several weeks, my nice, compassionate, usual self, and then somebody would say something tiny, and it would set me off. I kicked a hole in my bedroom door once. It was strange. It was like night and day, my good times and my bad times. And I pretty much came to hate him. One of the big issues with that is that him disappearing came at the beginning of one of the hardest times our family ever went through, with my mom split from Carl. For a lot of things that I'll talk about later. He has some real issues. We're really worried about the guy. But he got back in touch with my mom once, my dad did, to tell her he had had another child, my little brother Max. That was the one brief time my mom heard from him in those 4 years. So the next couple of years I spent not only not having heard from my dad, but knowing I had a little brother out there I'd never met. And I went to a summer camp at church, which I'd gone to a few years. And I always came away getting something out of it. It was a great time to get away from family troubles, as well as get more time in church and everything. And it was always fun. But in the service one night, kind of after service, the pastor was just talking. And he started talking about something he saw teenagers go through a lot, and people in general. And that was the whole issue of having emotional scars, where someone hurts you, and in order to deal with the hurt, you turn to anger. And it was funny because I had completely blocked my dad so far out of my head at that point. I was 16, and my plan had been, if he didn't get back in touch with me by my 16th birthday, that was it. He was never going to be a part of my life, and I wouldn't let him. And I sat there and I thought about it, does this apply to me, whatever. And all of a sudden, it just kind of broke that I hated my dad. And the reason I hated him is because I was so sick of crying about him. I hadn't cried about him in a while. I hadn't thought about him in a while, unless someone would say something like my mom would just out of the blue, you look just like your dad. I'd be fine up until that point. On the surface, and then I would lock myself in my room when I'd hear something like that, and I would just scream. And suddenly I realized I hated him, and that it was destroying my life, and it really was. And I just broke down crying. I never cried that hard in front of people in my life. I hate crying in front of people. And I lost it. And I cried for probably 20 minutes, and just broke. And I let it hurt, and I tried, and I made myself give up that anger and forgive him on my own without hearing anything from him. That was the biggest and hardest step I've ever taken. My life didn't get instantly better. It hurt in some ways more on a day-to-day basis to wake up and just something would remind me of my dad and that he wasn't there. And not having the ability to lapse right back into that anger meant I cried a little more. But I didn't hate the world. And my life managed to improve. I made friends. I had my first relationship. And that was a good and bad part of my life, and that's another story. But it was not long after we broke up. And I was a mess again, in a different way, as a lot of teenage girls are when something like that happens. And I came home from school, almost 18 years old, so it had been almost 4 years at this point. And we had just had a fight. We never fought when we were dating, but John and I had just had a really big fight. Came home from school, I just wanted to shut myself in my room, have my cry, and get over it. Just wanted to be alone. So I shut my door, and sure enough, as happens a lot in the house here with all the people, My little sister Brianna comes knocking at the door. And she comes in, and I just looked at her like, what do you want, you know? And she looked at me, and she looked nervous, bugging me, because I was obviously upset, and she didn't know what she was saying. She looked at me, she goes, Steffi, there's a message for you on the answering machine. He says it's your dad. And I just looked at her, and I didn't say anything, and I just stared, and she left, and she shut the door, and I sat there with just this, no, this can't be happening right now. I'm dealing with enough. But I went out there, and I listened to the message, and sure enough, it was my dad. Steffi, this is Robert, your dad. I think we have a few things to talk about. And he left me his number and his email. And I had to go to choir practice that night. And after I got back, the first time I talked to my dad in 4 years was over the internet. Then we talked on the phone and through emails, and then he came out for my 18th birthday. It's been 2 years now that he's been back in my life. I spent the summer out there last summer. And it's been awesome. You know, I mean, there are parts missing to our relationship. There's this whole complicated situation with my brother and sister, Doran and Treasure, who live in Wyoming still, and my relationship with them and my dad's relationship with them. But he's a part of my life now, and as less than perfect as that is, it's awesome. So I guess if there's a point to the story, it is definitely to watch what you do, how you take things when you're hurt. Because by letting that turn to anger, and I did that one more time in my life, not to the same degree, but I certainly did, and that was with my ex, John. And actually my dad is one of the people that helped me through that, which is kind of funny. But don't let it, you know, turn into that anger. Unforgiveness, whether or not you're a religious person, is a poison to the heart. I had to forgive my dad before he ever came back into my life, and if I hadn't, I would not have been a healthy person. A lot of good things would not have come about in my life. I would not have been able to throw myself into school so much. My grades definitely improved after that. You know, and I wouldn't be going to college. I wouldn't be able to do the things I am if I let that continue to poison me. So if there's a lesson here, it's definitely the importance of forgiveness and letting things like that hurt. And understanding that, you know, you're never alone, definitely for me. My faith, as I've said before, is an integral part of me, you know. Not something I'm going to preach, but definitely something that's going to be shared if I'm sharing details of my life, because it is my life. And it saved my life at that point. So, yeah, that's the backstory on my dad. I'll try and take some video of him when they get out here, and Danny, my little brother that I haven't met. I'm so excited. So I will keep you guys posted on that. Hope you enjoyed my story. It's probably kind of long. Talk to you later.